The debris field was quiet in the way that only space could be quiet. Total, complete, and heavy with what it used to be. Ryland Cross floated through it in his survey suit, his scanner humming in short pulses. He was supposed to be mapping mineral content in the asteroid belt near the edge of Sector 9. Instead, he was staring at the broken hull of a Dracovir cargo pod half buried inside a hollowed rock. The freighter it had belonged to was gone. Just scorched lines on stone told the story of what happened to it. He almost flagged it and moved on. That was the job. Then the scanner beeped. Biological signal. Faint. Warm. He pulled the pod loose carefully, brought it back to the Arden's cargo bay, and set it on the floor. The outer shell had split open along one side. The metal peeled back like old fruit skin. Inside, curled in a nest of burned insulation and something that looked like it used to be soft bedding, was the smallest dragon he had ever seen. She was the size of a large cat. Scales the color of old ivory, just barely catching the light. Eyes sealed shut, breathing in tiny, shallow pulls. Ryland stood over her for 10 seconds. Then he went and got a heat lamp. The ship's medical bay was not built for Dracovir infants. Ryland knew this. He also knew she would die without warmth and something in her stomach inside the next few hours, so he improvised. He lined a cargo crate with insulation foam, set the heat lamp above it, and spent 3 hours researching Dracovir infant nutrition on the cooperative database until he found something he could synthesize with the med-based protein unit. She woke up while he was feeding her, just opened her eyes, pale gold, blinking slowly, and looked at him. He expected her to panic. Young animals panicked. Instead, she just looked, like she was filing him away. Commander Okafor let him keep her on the condition that Ryland personally handled all care, all documentation, and all responsibility if a Dracovir elder ship showed up demanding answers. Ryland agreed without hesitation. Bryn, the ship's 4-armed engineer, immediately wanted to hold her. Ryland said not yet. Tix, the navigator, clicked his mandibles in what Ryland had learned was amusement. He named her Sova. It was an old Earth word. It meant owl in some languages, and in others something close to know. Both felt right. The mimicry started on day 3. Ryland was eating, fork in hand, slow deliberate bites, because he was reading a report at the same time. He looked up and Sova was holding a thin piece of tubing she had pulled from somewhere, gripping it exactly the way he gripped his fork, moving it toward the bowl of protein mash he had made for her. He put his fork down. She put the tube down. He picked it up. She picked it up. He held very still. So did she. He told Bryn about it that evening. Bryn said it was probably instinct. Dracovir young imprinted on whoever raised them, and mimicry helped them learn survival skills fast. Ryland nodded. That made sense. He still felt like something larger was happening. By the end of week 2, Sova was following him through every corridor she was allowed in. She had learned his schedule. She appeared at the medbay door when his shift started, and she was waiting outside when it ended. The crew found it funny. Ryland found it something he did not have a good word for yet. One afternoon he was practicing first aid. He did this regularly, working through procedures on a worn training dummy to keep his hands sharp. He wrapped a bandage around the dummy's forearm, slowly, showing the correct tension and overlap. He did not know Sova was behind him. When he turned around, she had dragged a small cloth from somewhere and was wrapping it around his hand. Not randomly, with intent, matching the motion she had just watched him perform. She pressed the end down with her claw, the way he had pressed the bandage flat with his thumb. Then she looked up at him. Ryland did not move for a long moment. He looked at the cloth on his hand. He looked at her. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, you're not just watching. That night he wrote in his mission log. He kept the logs dry and factual as a rule. This one was different. Sova, infant Dracovir female, approximately 3 weeks post-hatching, continues to mirror behavior with high accuracy. Motor mimicry is expected in imprint-bonded young. What is less expected? She appears to be copying intent. When I performed first aid on the training dummy, she performed first aid on me. She was not repeating a motion. She was doing what I had done, applied to a new situation. I do not know what to make of this. I do not think she sees a difference between what I am and what she is. I am not sure she is wrong. Sova was asleep in her crate when he finished writing. She had curled herself into the same loose position Ryland slept in, on her side, one arm forward, head tilted slightly down. He turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment. Then he went to sleep, and she slept the same way he did, in the room next door, small and gold, and quietly becoming something no one on the ship had thought to prepare for. 3 months passed the way deep space months did, slowly when you were inside them, and then all at once when you looked back. Silva had grown. Not dramatically, not the way a human child grew, but she was bigger in the way a river got bigger after rain. You noticed it only when something no longer fit the same. She no longer fit in the cargo crate. Ryland had moved her to a padded corner of his quarters, and she had immediately rearranged the padding to match his bunk layout almost exactly. The crew had stopped finding her mimicry funny. Not because it never stopped, but because funny was the wrong word for it now. It had become something they watched the way people watched a slow, quiet fire, waiting to understand what it was burning toward. Ryland used chopsticks when he ate noodle rations. He had since he was young, habit from his mother. 3 days after she first watched him, Silva appeared at the mess table with 2 thin wire rods she had gotten from somewhere. Bryn suspected the cable rack in the lower corridor, held exactly as Ryland held his chopsticks. She moved them toward her bowl with absolute seriousness. She dropped the food 4 times. She did not stop trying. By the second week she could do it. Ryland did morning stretches in the small corridor outside his quarters. He had a routine, 12 minutes, same order every day. Silva began joining him. She could not do all of it. Her body was shaped differently. But she found a version of each movement that matched the intent. When he stretched his arms overhead, she spread her wings to their full width and held them. When he touched the floor, she pressed both front claws flat against the ground. When he held a balance pose, she lifted one rear leg and went still, wobbling only a little. Tix watched from the corridor junction one morning and said nothing for a long time. Then he clicked and said, "She is not copying your body. She is copying your discipline." Ryland thought about that for the rest of the day. There was a salute on the Ardent, not required, a habit that had developed between the crew and Commander Okafor. A loose 2-finger lift from the brow when you passed her in the corridor. Ryland did it without thinking. Silva watched it happen once. The next time Okafor passed, Silva raised one small claw toward the brow ridge above her left eye and held it there. Okafor stopped walking. She looked at Silva for a long moment. Then she returned the salute. Same 2 fingers, same angle. Nobody made a joke about it. Bren got a bad cut on his lower left arm from a panel edge in the engine room. Ryland cleaned it, closed it, wrapped it. Silva sat beside him and watched. That evening, while Bren was resting in the crew lounge, Silva climbed up next to him, picked up a cloth from the med kit Ryland had left nearby, and pressed it gently to the wrapped arm. Not the wound, the wrap. She held it there for a moment, the way Ryland held pressure when he was checking circulation. Bren looked down at her and did not say a word. He just let her. Then came the moment that changed how Ryland thought about all of it. The Arden had been running supplies for a small independent trader named Voss, a rough sort, technically legal, personally likable. The crew had shared meals with him twice. Ryland had fixed his pilot's shoulder injury without charge. Then Ryland found the cargo manifest discrepancy. Something in the hold did not match what was declared. He dug carefully, quietly, and found that Voss was carrying a small quantity of contraband biologicals, banned not because they were harmful, but because they belonged to a protected species that could not be traded. Ryland went to Okafor. Voss was reported to cooperative authorities at the next station. He lost his trading license. He was furious. He had considered Ryland a friend. Ryland sat in the mess that evening and did not touch his food for a while. Silva came and sat across from him. She watched his face. He was not dramatic about it. He was not a dramatic person, but something was there, something that cost him. She could clearly see it. He put his hand flat on his chest, over his heart. He did not realize he was doing it. It was the thing his body did when he had made a hard choice and was sitting with the weight of it. Silva watched. Then, slowly, she lifted her right claw and placed it on her own chest, right over where her heart was. She held it there and looked at him. He noticed. He looked at her claw. He looked at her face. She was not mimicking a gesture. She was doing what he was doing, carrying something, sitting with it the same way he was sitting with it. Ryland did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. He picked up his fork and started eating, and Silva lowered her claw and watched him, and the mess hall was quiet and full of stars through the window. That night, Tix found Ryland in the corridor and said, without preamble. You understand she is not learning skills. She is learning values. Rylan looked at him for a moment. I know, he said. Do you understand what that means for what she will become? Rylan did not answer. He did not have an answer yet. But he thought about it long after the corridor lights dimmed, and Silva slept in the next room with her claw resting on her chest, even in sleep, the way he slept with his hand there on the nights that were heavy. The Dracovir warship did not hail the Ardent. It simply appeared alongside it, close enough that the proximity alarm fired, and waited. That was how Dracovir communicated urgency, not with words, with presence. Commander Okafor opened the channel herself. The face on the screen was old in the way that mountains were old, not visibly aged, but carrying weight that younger things did not have. Admiral Sendrak. His scales were deep blue-green, the color of deep ocean water. His eyes were the pale gold that all Dracovir shared, though his were harder than Silva's by a margin that could not be measured in any simple way. He said he had tracked the cargo pod transponder for 4 months. He said the infant inside was Kin Clan. He said he would be coming aboard. He did not ask. Okafor granted docking and then looked at Rylan, who was already crouching next to Silva in the corridor. Silva had heard the warship's engines even before the alarm. She was pressed against Rylan's side, not out of fear exactly, but out of something older than fear, the instinct of a young thing that does not know what is about to change. Drac came aboard with 2 attendants who stayed at the airlock. He walked the corridor like someone inspecting something he expected to find disappointing. Here were no weapons that could be seen. He did not need to. He looked at Silva. Silva looked back at him. Then she looked up at Rylan. She checked his face. He was calm, hands loose at his sides, posture open, no tension in his jaw. She read all of it and mirrored it. She stood a little straighter. She stopped pressing into his side. Drac's eyes moved to Rylan. Something passed through them. She checked you, he said. It was not quite a question. She does that, Rylan said. Before her own elder. She checked a human. She knows me, Rylan said simply. She doesn't know you yet. Drac was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would observe for 1 hour before completing the transfer documentation. He said it as though he was doing Rylan a courtesy, but Rylan thought it was something else, that Drac was genuinely uncertain about what he was looking at, and uncertain was not a state he visited often. The hour happened in the common room. Rylan made tea, real tea from his personal rations, not the synthesized kind, because that was what he did when he sat with someone new. He set a cup in front of Drac without comment. Drac looked at it and said nothing. Silva watched Rylan set the cup down. Then she picked up a small empty container from the side table, walked to Drac's end of the room, and set it in front of him beside the tea. She had nothing to put in it. It was just the gesture. She had seen Rylan always bring something to guests. Drac looked at the empty container for a long moment. Then Silva climbed up on the bench beside Rylan, reached across him, picked up his wrist, and held his forearm flat. She pressed her ear against his pulse point. It was what she did when she thought someone might be hurt. She had watched Rylan take pulses hundreds of times, and she had applied it to everything since, including crew members who had simply looked tired. She is checking your health, Tix said from the doorway, because Drac's expression suggested he wanted an explanation. I am not injured, Drac said. She doesn't know that, Rylan said. She checks everyone. Drac watched her release Rylan's wrist and sit back. Then Drac said something in Dracovir, short, sharp, a word that carried the tone of a command or a correction. His voice was not cruel. It was the tone of someone used to being obeyed. Silva looked at him. Then she looked at Rylan's face. Rylan's face was calm, patient. No flinch, no reaction to the authority in Drac's voice. He simply sat with it, the way he sat with every difficult thing, present, quiet, not giving it more power than it had. Silva turned back to Drac, and she wore Rylan's face. Calm, patient, steady. Drac sat back slowly. After the hour, he signed the transfer documents. He did it at the table, with the tea still in front of him, and Rylan noticed that at some point Drac had picked up the cup and held it, though he had not drunk from it. Silva pressed her nose against Rylan's hand when they took her to the airlock. He scratched behind the ridge of her ear. She had always liked that, and he said, very quietly, pay attention. Keep learning. Be good. She held still under his hand. Then she raised her claw to the ridge above her eye. The salute she had copied from Okafor. Held at the same angle, the same 2-claw lift. He returned it. Same angle, same 2 fingers. Drac watched all of it from 3 steps away. His face was unreadable, which in Ryland's experience meant something was being read very carefully. The airlock closed. The warship departed. Okafor came to stand beside Ryland. They watched it go on the rear display. "She'll be okay," Okafor said. "I know," Ryland said. He did know. But the ship felt a different size than it had that morning, and he went back to the med bay and straightened things that did not need straightening for a while before he was ready to do anything else. The first message from Drac came 11 months after Silva left. It arrived as a formal diplomatic transmission, routed through the cooperative relay and flagged as priority correspondence from a Dracovir flag officer. Okafor received it first, read it twice, and then walked it to Ryland without saying anything. She handed him the datapad and left. The message was brief, formal in structure, the way Dracovir formal always was. No greeting, no close, just the information and the question at the end. It said Silva was in good health. Her development was within normal range for her age. She had integrated into the Kin clan training cohort without conflict. These were the facts. Then it said something that was not a fact. It was an observation that Drac had clearly turned over many times before writing down. It said, Silva is doing things that Dracovir young do not do. She sat with injured cohort mates when they were recovering from training exercises. She did not play near them, did not guard them, did not compete with them for position. She simply sat beside them and stayed until they were better. This was not a Dracovir behavior. The young did not tend each other. They did not lower themselves to service. She pressed her claw to her chest when she made a hard decision. Her trainers had noticed. They did not know what it meant. They had asked Drac, and Drac did not know either, but he knew where he had seen it. She bowed her head when an elder spoke to her. Not in the Dracovir way. The Dracovir display of deference was a lowering of the wing, a presentation of the neck. She bowed her head. The human way. The way of a person who was listening, not submitting. Her trainers found it strange. Some found it embarrassing. A Dracovir youth should carry herself with the pride of the Kin clan, not the manners of a soft species laborer. The message ended with one line. What did you teach her? Ryland read it 3 times. He sat with it the way he sat with difficult things, and then he wrote back. He kept his reply short too. He had a feeling Drac would not have patience for length. He wrote, Nothing. I just lived my life next to her. He sent it. He did not hear back for 2 weeks. When the reply came, it was even shorter than the first message. It said, Explain. So Ryland did. He wrote a longer message this time, and he tried to be honest in the way that was useful rather than the way that was just thorough. He wrote about the chopsticks and the stretches. He wrote about the bandage and the salute. He wrote about the night he reported Voss and sat in the mess with his hand on his chest, and how she put her claw in the same place because she was doing what he was doing, not the motion, the meaning. He wrote, I think she learned by watching what I chose to do when it was hard. Not the easy parts. The hard parts are the ones she paid closest attention to. I don't know why. I don't know if there's a word for what she was doing. But she was watching what things cost me and how I carried that cost. And she was deciding that was how she wanted to carry things too. Then he added one last line, because it was true and it felt important. I didn't try to teach her anything. I just didn't hide from her. She did the rest. He sent it and went back to his shift. On the Dracovir training world, 11 months of travel away, Silva was in her 4th week of fire breath development exercises. She was behind the other young. The fire came slowly to her for reasons the trainers noted but could not explain. But what she lacked in that specific development, she made up for in other ways that the trainers were less equipped to measure. When a younger cohort mate was struggling with a fear exercise, a simulation of deep space isolation, which broke some of the young entirely, Silva stayed in the chamber with him. Not because she was told to. Not because it helped her score. She stayed because he was scared and she was not. And she had somewhere learned that you did not leave someone alone with something heavy if you had the capacity to share the weight. The trainer watching through the observation glass was a senior Dracovir named Fell. He had trained young for 60 years. He had never seen this behavior. He filed a report. It went to Drac. Drac received it the same day he received Ryland's long message. He read them both. He read them again. He sat in his command room for a very long time, looking at nothing in particular. Then he wrote a note in his personal record. He did not send it to anyone. It was just for him. It said, The human did not teach her discipline. He taught her what discipline is for. There is a difference, and I did not understand that difference until now. I have been training young for 40 years, and I taught them to be strong. He lived next to one of ours for 4 months, and she learned to be good. I do not know what to do with this. He closed the record. He went to watch Silva's evening training. She was doing her balance exercises alone in the yard, long after the others had gone in for rest, working on something she had not yet gotten right, in the dark, without anyone watching her. Or so she thought. Drax stood at the edge of the yard and watched her fall and try again, fall and try again. She did not look frustrated. She looked patient. He had seen that face before. On a human, in a common room, sitting across from someone twice his size without flinching, calm in a way that had nothing to do with certainty and everything to do with something Drax was only now finding a name for. He went back inside without saying anything. But the next morning, for the first time since she had arrived, he brought her something with her meal. A small cup. He put it in front of her without comment. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. Something moved in her pale gold eyes. Then she picked up the cup and held it with both claws, the way she had seen someone do it once, in a common room very far away. Drax sat across from her, and they ate in silence, and it was the quietest and most significant conversation he had managed in years. Nobody called it an attack at first. That was the thing about well-planned violence. It looked like bureaucracy until the doors locked. Rylan had been at Cooperative Science Station Vareth for 6 days, attending a xenobiology conference that he had been genuinely looking forward to. Good speakers, real data, decent food. The kind of event that made deep space postings feel like they were connected to something larger. The Veth Collective seized the station on the morning of Day 7. They were not soldiers, exactly. They were a separatist group, species who believed humanity had been allowed into the Galactic Cooperative too quickly, given too much access to interstellar infrastructure, trusted before they had been proven. There were 400 people on Vareth when the Collective locked it down. The Collective's demand was simple. The Cooperative Council would sign a treaty restricting human membership within 48 hours, or the station would be destroyed as a demonstration of what happened when the Council made poor decisions. They had planted an explosive link in the station's reactor management system. Remote detonation. Clean and catastrophic. Rylan found out about the access corridor on hour 3, when he was in a locked conference room with 11 other people, and one of them happened to be the station's chief engineer, who happened to know the layout of the reactor override system, who happened to be slowly coming apart at the seams while Rylan sat next to him and quietly helped him keep it together. The override corridor ran parallel to the reactor housing. If someone physically went in, manually isolated the detonation relay, and cut it from inside, the remote signal would have nothing to connect to. The explosive link would die. The station would be safe. The corridor would flood with hard radiation the moment the reactor housing seal was breached. It happened automatically, a safety lockdown designed to protect the station from contamination. The seal breach that would allow access to the relay would also trigger the flood. Survivable, the engineer said, in the way that meant he had done the math and did not like the numbers. Probably survivable. Radiation protocols gave a person maybe 12 minutes before the exposure became the kind that could not be walked off. The relay was 8 minutes in. Nobody in the room said anything for a while after that. Rylan thought about it for 2 minutes. He thought about it the way he had thought about reporting Voss, carefully, without shortcuts, looking at the full shape of it. There were 400 people on the station. The Cooperative Council would not sign the treaty. The Collective would follow through. He knew they would follow through because people who build a plan this clean did not build it to hesitate. He asked the engineer 3 specific questions about the relay mechanism. The engineer answered them. Rylan nodded. "Walk me to the corridor," he said. "You understand what you're—" "Yes," Rylan said. "Walk me to it." He went in at the 11-minute mark before the Collective's next scheduled communication, which bought him a window where they would not notice activity in the lower decks. He moved fast. The corridor was narrow and poorly lit, and he could feel the heat rising as he got closer to the relay junction. Not temperature heat, the kind his body registered as radiation exposure beginning, an instinct humans had developed the hard way. He found the relay. He cut it. It took 4 minutes and 2 wrong attempts and 1 moment where his hands were not quite steady, and he made them steady again by remembering that this was just a thing that needed to be done, same as everything else, Same as the bandage on the training dummy. Same as all of it. Just a thing you did because it was in front of you, and you were the one who could do it. The relay went dark. The signal died. Rylan walked back. He made it to the far end of the corridor before his legs decided they had expressed their opinion and were no longer taking requests. He sat down against the wall. The floor was warm. The air had the strange, clean smell of hard radiation exposure. Not unpleasant, which was the dangerous part. He put his hand on his chest. He was not thinking about anything specific. He was just sitting with the weight of it, the way he always did, the way his body knew how to do even when his mind was catching up. On Drax's warship, responding to the crisis alert from Cooperative Emergency Command, Silva was at the sensor station. She had grown significantly in 18 months, still smaller than an adult Dracovir, but no longer small in the way that invited the word infant. She wore a junior officer's designation on her shoulder ridge. She was watching the station schematics on her screen when the bioscan data came through. Cooperative emergency protocols included automatic life sign broadcasting from all registered crew members. Standard procedure. The scan flagged an isolated life sign in the reactor corridor, elevated radiation exposure, reduced mobility, stable but declining. The crew designation attached to that life sign was one she had memorized without meaning to, the way you memorize things that had been with you since the beginning of everything you knew. Cross, Rylan. Xenobiologist. GCS Ardent. Silva sat very still for 3 seconds. Then she understood exactly what he had done, because she had been watching him do smaller versions of it her entire life. She had watched him give his portion of rations to a sick crew member and say he wasn't hungry when he was. She had watched him stay awake through his rest period to finish a report so Okafor would not have to. She had watched him absorb the weight of other people's hard days and carry it quietly so they did not have to carry it alone. She had been copying him since before she had words for what copying meant. She stood up. She logged a shuttle departure. Nobody gave her permission. Nobody told her to stop either, because she moved with the absolute calm certainty of someone who was doing the only thing there was to do, and that kind of certainty was very hard to argue with. Drax saw her on the launch bay feed. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. He watched the shuttle leave. He did not call it back. The station was chaos in the way stations became chaos. Everyone moving, no one sure where to go, voices over the intercom trying to organize people who were too relieved and too shaken to be organized. Silva walked through it like it was quiet. She had the bioscan data on a handheld unit, and she followed it through 3 corridors and 2 emergency stairwells and 1 sealed door that she opened by the simple method of pulling it until the frame gave, which got the attention of several people who immediately decided they had business elsewhere. She found Rylan sitting against the wall at the end of the reactor corridor. He looked up when she came through the door. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, very calmly, "You're bigger." "Yes," she said. Her cooperative standard was slow but clear, words she had learned deliberately over 18 months because she knew she would need them. "How did you get here?" "Shuttle. Drax's shuttle." "Yes." "Did he know?" "He saw me leave." She crossed the corridor and crouched in front of him. She ran the bioscan unit over him. The numbers were not good, but they were not the worst they could be. She had checked the data on the shuttle. She had 12 minutes of useful action before her own exposure became a problem. She had been inside the station for 4 of them. She did not tell him any of this. She put the scanner away and she reached for him. He let her take his weight without argument, which told her more about how he was doing than any scanner reading. Rylan Cross did not accept help without argument unless argument genuinely did not seem worth the energy. Dracovir physiology handled radiation differently than human physiology did. The scales absorbed. The body processed slowly over time rather than sustaining acute damage in the moment. A young Dracovir could absorb a significant dose without the immediate collapse that would kill a human, but significant had a cost, and the cost was specific, and Silva knew what it was. She knew her fire was late. Her trainers had noted it for months. The internal development that led to fire breath in a Dracovir required cellular energy that radiation exposure redirected to shielding and repair. More exposure meant more diversion. More diversion meant longer delay. She already knew this. She had run the numbers on the shuttle. She had understood the cost before she launched. She had launched anyway. She pulled him out slowly, shielding his body with her own, her scales taking what was left in the corridor as they moved. He was quiet against her side. She could feel him breathing, shallow but steady, the rhythm of someone managing themselves with intention. At the corridor exit, she moved him to the floor and checked him again. He was stable. She was displaying 3 indicators of significant absorption on her scales, a faint luminescence in the patches near her shoulder ridges that meant active radiation processing, the kind that her body would be busy managing for weeks. Drac was in the bay when they came through. He had docked behind her. He was not alone. 2 medics from the warship were with him, already moving toward Rylan. Drac himself stood at the edge of the bay and watched Silva set Rylan down carefully, watched her make sure his head was not against the hard floor, watched her take his hand and press her ear to his pulse point the way she had done since she was small enough to fit in a cargo crate. The medics took over. Rylan did not fight them. Silva stood back. She was breathing slowly. Her shoulder ridges were still faintly lit. Drac walked to her. He stood in front of her, and he looked at her for a long time. He looked at her scales. He looked at her face. He looked at where she was looking, which was at the medics working on Rylan. "You understand what you have cost yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Your fire." "Yes." "It will be years." "Yes." Drac was quiet. In 40 years of commanding and training and leading, he had not been quiet this often. But the last 2 years had given him a great deal to be quiet about. "Why?" he said. She turned and looked at him. She lifted her right claw and placed it flat against her chest, over her heart. The gesture was the same as it had always been, steady, deliberate, the weight of something large held carefully. "He showed me," she said. Drac looked at her claw. He looked at her face. He thought about a human sitting in a common room with tea cooling in front of him, patient and unafraid, and a baby dragon who had pressed herself against his side before she knew what she was doing or why. He thought about what the human had written in that message, months ago. "I just lived my life next to her." He thought about what that life had apparently contained, and what she had been collecting from it, piece by piece, for 2 years, without any of them fully understanding what she was building. He put his hand on her shoulder. He had not done that before. It was not a Dracovir gesture. He did it anyway. "Go rest," he said quietly. She went. The Cooperative Council received a formal communiqué from the Dracovir kin assembly 6 days later. It was short, and it was unambiguous. Humanity was declared a protected species partner of the Dracovir people. Any action against a human registered under Cooperative Charter would be treated as an action against the Dracovir themselves. The Veth Collective's remaining members scattered within hours of the announcement. Nobody publicly understood why the Dracovir had made that declaration. Nobody who mattered asked. Rylan recovered over 3 weeks. He was on the Ardent, in the med bay he had spent years working in, and Okafor kept the crew from overwhelming him with visits by posting a schedule on the door. Bren violated the schedule twice. Tick stood outside the window and clicked until Rylan waved at him. A small package arrived on week 2, delivered from the Dracovir warship via cooperative courier. No note, just a small cloth, folded neatly, wrapped around a wooden toy, a simple carved shape. One of the crew's children had left it on the Ardent years ago, and it had ended up in the medbay corner where Silva used to sit. The cloth was bandaged around the toy's forearm. Slow, careful wrapping. Correct tension. Correct overlap. The end pressed flat, held down by a small claw-shaped crease in the fabric. The first thing she had ever copied from him. Done now with the hands of someone who had learned what it was really for. Rylan held the toy for a while. Then he put it on the shelf above his bunk, where he could see it, and he lay back and looked at the ceiling, and he thought about how humans had always wondered what it was that made them. It was not the weapons. It was not the numbers. It was not that they were brave, because plenty of species were brave. It was that they lived in a way that made other things want to be more. They lived openly, right in front of whoever was watching, and they did not hide the hard parts. And somewhere a small golden dragon had watched a man sit with his hand on his chest after a difficult choice, and she had decided that was how she wanted to carry things too, and she had carried it all the way to a radiation corridor on a burning space station. And that was the most human thing that had ever been done by someone who was not human at all. Rylan closed his eyes. Down in the cargo bay, in a crate she had padded herself with the same layout as a bunk, Silva slept. Her shoulder ridges still glowed faintly, her body still working, still processing the long, slow cost of what she had chosen. She slept on her side, one arm forward, head tilted slightly down. The way she had always slept. The way she had learned.